In a previous tutorial we made a copy of the recipe Reader's Digest Read in the recipe to formula environment of Matrix. In this tutorial we'll replace the unavailable materials in Reader's Digest Read in the formula to recipe environment. This method will avoid all of the manipulation required in the recipe to formula environment and will give us an exact Unity formula copy. Let's start by booting Matrix and loading the recipe. At the bottom of the R1 panel there is a button which, if clicked, will send the recipe to the formula to recipe environment. We are now in the formula to recipe environment and the Unity formula for the original recipe is loaded. If we need a reminder about the materials and quantities in the original recipe, we can click the Show Original button. This opens a window containing the original recipe, which we can pop over to one side. We are now ready to create a new recipe based on the original Unity formula. In the Fill Mode panel, there are three options. We will choose the second. A window opens with a list of materials. A red arrow points to the oxide that is to be filled. In the first instance, it is boric oxide, B2O3. The list of materials in the pre-select mode window gives us various options from our local materials database. In the original recipe, Gerstli borate is used, so we will stick to the original recipe as much as possible. A single click will display the Unity formula of the material in the pre-select mode window. Double-click on Gerstli borate. By doing that, we chose Gerstli borate to fill the required proportion of B2O3. If we turn our attention to the main matrix window, now we can see that considerable change has occurred. There are three columns of numbers. The first column shows the Unity formula of the original recipe. The second column, headed Input, shows the proportions of oxides that have come into the new recipe as a result of our selection of materials. The third column, headed Needed, shows the proportion of oxides that are still needed to complete making a copy of the original. In this case we have chosen Gerstli borate, so oxides that material contains will have been input into the new recipe. Gerstli borate was chosen to fill the B2O3. In the Needed column it shows OK next to the B2O3 to indicate that we do not need any more of that oxide. The red arrow has shifted to point at the KNO row. This indicates that the proportions of K2O plus Na2O will be addressed next. In the pre-select mode window, the list of materials has changed to give us a selection of materials that will fill the KNO requirements. It is important to note that in this mode, Matrix has filtered the materials containing the KNO oxides and has only shown us those that would fill the KNO requirements of the original recipe without overloading any of the remaining oxides in the unity formula. In other words, any of the materials in the list will do. We can select the one that best suits us. Wherever possible, we should use materials, of course, that occurred in the original recipe. We'll choose nepheline cyanide to fill the KNO. That deals with two of the oxides in our original formula. The arrow shifts to alumina, Al2O3, and gives us a selection of materials to use for this oxide. The list of materials that you see in the pre-select mode window will depend on what materials you have, of course, in your personal local materials database. There are just 3 oxides left to fill. The red arrow points to MgO, magnesium oxide, and the materials list gives us the options of talc or magnesium carbonate light. The original recipe used talc, so we will choose that. When we did this exercise in the recipe to formula environment, we accepted a small variation in the proportions of calcium oxide. In this environment, Matrix wants to make an exact copy of the unity formula, so it recognizes a need to put in a small amount of calcium oxide and offers 2 materials to achieve this. This leaves us with just 1 oxide left to fill, silica. The pre-select mode list of materials now disappears. All of the oxides in the needed column have OK beside them, and the input column of numbers matches the original formula. We can see the new recipe that has been generated in the new recipe panel and can compare it with the original. All that remains is to click the Accept New button to tell Matrix that we are happy with the new recipe. The new recipe and its unity formula along with the colorant now appear in the formula to recipe environment. The unity formula is an exact copy of the original, however we have chosen locally available materials so the recipe looks different. There is just one last function that some will find useful. We originally loaded Reader's Digest Red into the R1 panel in the recipe to formula environment. Back in the formula to recipe environment, we finished the creation of a new recipe. Now we can send that recipe back to the recipe to formula environment by clicking this button. A window comes up asking if you want to send the recipe to the R1, R2 or R3 panels in recipe to formula. We will send the recipe to the R2 panel as we already have the original in the R1 panel. When the selection is made, the matrix window switches to recipe to formula and the new recipe is displayed in the second panel. It can now be renamed and saved there.